Welcome to the Global Pulse, a short video series where our experts break down a trending topic in international business and why it matters to you.
Global airline industry accounts for about 3% of worldwide CO2 emissions. In addition, vapor trails emitted by jet aircraft likely exacerbate the impact of commercial airlines on climate change by contributing to cloud formations that trap heat in the Earth's atmosphere. As a result, airlines have been increasingly called to task by environmentalists and government officials to reduce their CO2 emissions and potential impact on climate change. 125 countries from around the world have signed on to the International Civil Aviation Organization's carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation, known as CORSIA. Under CORSIA, countries have to target CO2 offsets for the airline emissions that are made by airlines from their countries. In addition, airlines themselves have set targets for CO2 reductions, with major U.S. airlines promising to reduce CO2 emissions by 10% by 2030 and to be completely carbon neutral by 2050. In seeking to reduce their carbon emissions, airlines have looked at their operations and seen that 98% of carbon emissions come from flight operations. Or the additional 2% comes from ground operations and other ways that the airlines contribute to CO2 emissions. So the airlines have been looking for ways to reduce the CO2 emissions from their airline flight operations. The best way for the airlines to reduce these CO2 emissions is by using what is known as sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF. Sustainable aviation fuels may be made from ethanol, from palm oil, or even from waste streams from industrial complexes, and can result in CO2 emissions on flights by 50% or more. The U.S. government has provided incentives for airlines to adopt SAF, and the airlines are looking to use those incentives in order to try to reduce their carbon emissions. The problem is that the technology is not there to produce sufficient amount of SAF for the airlines. Moreover, the cost of SAF is considerably higher than the cost of kerosene, the jet fuel that's currently used by the airlines. As a result, less than 1% of fuel used by the airlines currently is SAF. The production facilities are not in place to produce more SAF, and the airlines are not in a position to be able to buy more SAF since it's not available. Meeting the airline reductions of 10% of CO2 emissions by 2030 and becoming completely carbon neutral by 2050 requires advancement in technology as well as a supply chain for SAF fuels. Therefore, the target that the airlines have set for themselves is quite difficult to meet. Now, the airlines themselves view these targets as being essential for their long-term well-being. They realize that they're under threat by environmentalists who would like to increase the taxes or on airline flights, as well as to limit the amount of flying that is done by the airlines. So they really do need to meet these targets in order to remain a viable industry.